11 million people die every year from eating bad food and not enough good food. That's more people than die from smoking or any other cause of death. And most people don't understand the connection between how they feel and what they eat. General narrative is that basically your fault if you're overweight. Calories in, calories out. So if you eat less and exercise more, that you lose weight. If you don't, it means you're a lazy glutton. And that just flies in the face of science. The science is really clear that the foods that we've made available to people are highly addictive. And at the same time, we kind of vilified fat.
Free. Get it fat-free.
Fat-free. Low-fat diets were better for us. Well, it turned out that wasn't true. And we go, oh, well, meat has fat, it has saturated fat, and that's bad. But it's important to understand like quality matters.
What are the most impactful dietary steps we can take as consumers?
Well,
hey everyone, we've got Dr. Mark Hyman on the show, an American physician, a leader in functional medicine, New York Times bestselling author. We're going to talk about the importance of diet for health and disease prevention and the pitfalls with some of our current recommendations and the food system at large. So welcome, Dr. Hyman.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so let's just get into it. How important is our diet to health and disease prevention?
It's the most important thing we do every day to control the quality and the length of our life and our health. So it's number 1, 2, 3, and 4, I would say. Exercise is in there, but diet is just the most important thing. And most people don't understand the connection between it, how they feel and what they eat. And even among highly educated people, and I see many of them, they're clueless about how their physical symptoms and their physical well-being, not just weight, is connected to the quality and the type of food they're eating or not eating.
Yes. And if we look at the burden of diet-related disease in the world, how impactful is it?
I mean, it's huge. I mean, the number 1 killer, and I think this is conservatively estimated because I would say it's probably more than this, is 11 million people die every year from eating bad food and not enough good food. That's more people than die from smoking or any other cause of death. So it's the number 1 cause of death in the world. And yet most people have no clue.
Right.
And most healthcare systems don't address it. Most policies that we have in our government and around the world don't address it. And we're really in a situation where it's like Dorothy with her ruby red slippers, she had the power to get back to Kansas all the time. She just didn't know it. And we have the power to reverse all these chronic diseases, to deal with 80% of our healthcare costs, which is $4.1 trillion now in America. The, billions of dollars of disability and suffering we spend every year. That's all preventable and reversible.
It's amazing. So let's get into that. What are these most problematic foods that most Americans are consuming today that they might not be aware of?
Well, 60% of adults' diet and 67% of kids' diet is ultra processed food. It's basically pulverized industrial food ingredients that bear no resemblance to their original form. So byproducts of corn and wheat and oil, refined oils and other chemicals and additives and things that just are not even food that we're eating. And for every 10% of your diet that's ultra processed food, and remember, it's 60% of average adults' diet, your risk of death goes up by 14%. So what's 14 times 6? I'm not so good at math, but it's a big number. And I think that's a lot of risk that we are incurring because of eating processed food. So what is ultra processed food? It's, things we're familiar with, packaged foods that are, cereals and snacks and all the sort of things you buy in the grocery store down the middle of the aisles. It's not around the outside. It's not the vegetables, the fruit, the meat, and the fish and the dairy, which is sort of around the outside. So if you stick with that, you're going to be pretty good. If you go down the aisles, you can get in trouble pretty fast. So that's number 1. Sugar and starch is a big component of that. And I would say if you look at the number 1 driver of disease, aging, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, dementia, it's sugar and starch. And when I say starch, I mean, we think, oh, well, if I would say the average person, what's worse, a bowl of sugar or a slice of bread? A couple, or the equivalent amount of bread. They go, oh, it's the sugar. I'm like, no, it's actually the bread.
Yeah.
I mean, they're both pretty bad. The glycemic index of white bread is basically the gold standard. It's 100. Sugar is like 65. So that doesn't mean that sugar is good for you. It just means that it's got fructose, which doesn't raise your blood sugar as much, but it still has bad effects. So, I mean, I think we have to really understand that the amount of starch and sugar we're eating is just mountains and mountains. Almost a pound a day per person in America, and it should be ounces.
Wow. Wow. And there is this big mainstream narrative that animal products are part of this driving force of the epidemic of our diet related disease. What are your thoughts
Yeah.
on that? Yeah. Where's that coming from? Is that true?
Well, it's complicated, right? So, how do we know what we know in science? It's through these large population studies, and we made a lot of mistakes. Some of these population studies told us, for example, that low fat diets were better for us. Well, it turned out that wasn't true. In fact, has led to letting millions and millions of deaths because of the substitution of fat in our diet for refined starch and carbohydrate. I mean, the food pyramid was the famous example of that, with 6 to 11 servings of bread, rice, cereal, and pasta recommended for everybody in America every day, which is a lot. I'm like, 11 servings of bread. Okay. Um, and at the same time, we kind of vilified fat, and we go, oh, well, meat has fat, it has saturated fat, and that's bad. And now, there's been the really enormous amount of information, literature, science showing that saturated fats in general aren't the boogeyman we thought they were. Now, they're bad if you eat them with carbohydrate, like if starch and sugar are consumed with saturated fat, it's deadly. But absent that, if you're eating, for example, butter on your broccoli versus on your bread, it's not bad for you.
I love
I
that.
think the other thing is, um, the large population studies that looked at meat were done at a time when meat was thought to be unhealthy, when the government was telling people to not eat meat, when saturated fat was the boogeyman. And so when you look at a population that's trying to be healthy, their habits are many in that context, right? They don't eat meat, they exercise, they don't smoke, they eat their fruits and vegetables, they don't drink too much alcohol, they take their vitamins. These are healthier people. And so of course they would have less heart disease, in diabetes and cancer. If you look at the people who ate meat in those studies, they were, and these are again population studies where they just basically give people a questionnaire and say, "Would you eat?" And then they would do these food frequency questionnaires, and they're imperfect to start with, but they're even worse in a context where the background beliefs in society are a certain way. So the people, for example, in those studies who ate meat, they ate 800 calories more a day, they smoked more, they drank more, they didn't eat fruits and vegetables, they ate more sugar, processed food, didn't take any vitamins. So guess what? Yeah, they had more heart disease and diabetes and cancer, but was it because of the meat? No, it was all this other stuff. So, and I think it's the overall quality of your diet. And I think the evidence is that meat is pretty much neutral. It's a lot of health benefits in terms of like the protein quality and muscle building, the bioavailable levels of zinc and iron and other things. But um it's not like the boogeyman that we thought it was. But it's important to understand, like, quality matters, right? So if you're eating a processed, meat, probably not great, right? If you're eating, unprocessed meat, there seems to be, minimal or no risk or maybe benefit. So I think there's really little downside. And I think particularly as we get older, and I just finished my book, Young Forever, on longevity. And what was really clear in that book is that we need higher quality protein as we get older. We need more protein and higher quality protein. And the best quality protein out there is animal protein, period. I mean, and it has one of the essential nutrients you need for muscle synthesis, which is a big problem. As we get older, we lose muscle and we become frail and we become diseased, and it creates our metabolic disaster because our metabolism is where our muscle is. And so to build muscle, you need leucine, and leucine is a rate limiting step for building muscle. And animal protein has far more leucine than plant protein. So to get the equivalent amount of like leucine that you get in like 4 ounces of chicken or steak, you'd have to have 6 cups of brown rice. you
Yeah.
know, well, that's not pretty realistic, right? So I think the reality is that it is a source of really amazing, helpful, bioavailable nutrients, and is not the enemy we thought it was.
Beautifully stated. And since you brought up aging, are you thinking of adding glycine and methionine restriction? I'm just wondering, do you think we need to reduce it? Because there is this also push for we need to reduce the amount of animal products that we're consuming to age
Yeah. Yeah.
outside of
Yeah,
muscle?
I'm gonna answer I'm gonna answer that because that's a just a kind of mistaken idea. I think that we also want to say that there's two other issues around meat. One is ethical and one is environmental, and I just want to briefly address those because the health issues I think are pretty clear. It's pretty neutral and it has a lot of health benefits in certain populations. As far as the environmental issues, yes, feedlot farming and industrial agriculture is a disaster for the planet and for the animals, and it should be banned. That's not happening anytime soon, but we're moving towards a more regenerative agriculture. If you're looking at regenerative-based animals, they actually can sequester carbon, they improve soils, they improve health ecosystems, and there's a huge amount of data that shows, and I've written about this in my book Food Fix, of how regenerative agriculture systems can be a solution to climate change, and not the solution, but part of the solution. Um, and it's also the animals are out there doing their normal thing, and I was in Hawaii and I was riding horses, and it was on this ranch, and it was like hundreds of acres, and these cattle are roaming around, and I'm like, well, I said to the people, like, what do you do these things? Well, they just roam around, and we kind of get them once in a while, but they basically just do whatever they want to do, and they're eating all these wild plants and hundreds of different things, and they actually forage for things that are medicinal because they know how to feed themselves, right? That's kind of ideal, but that's not the case for most of the meat we eat. And then thirdly, um, on the moral side and the ethical side, and if you're a Buddhist, or if you really have strong beliefs around this, I understand. Like, if you don't want to eat meat, that's a fair choice, it's a personal choice, but it don't conflate that with the bad health effects or the environmental effects, which I think are highly dependent on the quality of what you're doing. As far as the whole issue around longevity and animal protein and protein in general, there is a switch in your body that I talk about in my book Young Forever. That's a longevity switch called mTOR. Now, this is in all the cells of your body, and essentially it's stimulated by protein and by also carbohydrates, by the way, and sugars. And mTOR is stimulated, and when it's stimulated by leucine, we talked about leucine, which is important for muscle synthesis. It activates this particular pathway that helps you build muscle, which is really important. On the other hand, if it's always switched on, and if you're always eating all day long and you don't take a break, you can't quiet down this pathway, this switch, and turn on the other thing you need for longevity, which is cellular cleanup. We call autophagy, self-cannibalism. Autophagy, auto means self, and eating, phagy means eating. So eating yourself, basically. And that's a good thing because it cleans up all the debris and the waste and all the junk in your tissues. And that turns out is a critical way to extend your life and to prevent many chronic diseases of aging. So what should you do? Should you starve all the time so your mTOR is off? Probably not, because you'll starve to death. Should you eat meat and food all the time? No, because you'll turn on these switches and get overweight and get cancer and heart disease and obesity and diabetes. So it's really a Goldilocks problem. So the solution to that is pretty simple, which is take a break from the time you eat dinner till the time you eat breakfast of at least 12 hours, ideally 14, and maybe even 16 for those who want to go a little longer, which sounds daunting, but it's not. If you eat dinner at 6, that means you can eat breakfast at 8 o'clock at night. I mean, 8 o'clock in the morning, right? It's not that hard. If you want to have a very long fast, you can go dinner at 6 and breakfast at 10 in the morning. Most people are not going to have trouble with that. So I think that'll turn on autophagy, that'll get mTOR rolling, that'll inhibit it, that'll get the cellular cleanup happening. And then for your first meal of the day, when you're in a fasted state, have a big load of protein. Like I do goat whey protein in the morning. You can use eggs, whatever you want, but I find that activates muscle synthesis, gets my body going, and builds more muscle. And I'm building more muscle at 63 than I ever did. And I have pictures of myself when I was 40 or 50, and I'm way more muscular than I was then, which is going way against the idea of what's supposed to happen as you get older. So, I mean, I'm kind of shocked by it, to be honest with you, because it sort of goes against what I learned too as a doctor. But the facts are the facts of what's happening in my body, and I see this in all my patients too. So I think it's really about the Goldilocks solution, not one like starvation is good, so always starve, or building muscle is always good. So always build. No, it's really this middle ground that is important to understand.
Yes, thank you for all of that beautiful nuance. And on that note, like you said, ethical decisions aside, do you think from a health perspective, diets without meat are risky for adults and also for children?
Well, I think there's ways to be a healthy vegan, but it's very, very hard. And I think that you need to probably, especially as you get older, eat supplemented plant proteins or processed plant proteins, which I'm not a big fan of, like pea protein, for example, or soy protein or other kinds of proteins. And there are better kinds, pumpkin seed, hemp seed, and they usually need to be supplemented with branched chain amino acids like leucine. So there are ways to do it, but I think there was a story I wrote about in my book of Emma Morano, who was a woman who lived to be 117 years old when she was a young lady who she was anemic, and her doctor told her to eat 3 eggs a day, which she did her whole life. And then in her 90s, she was getting a little kind of frail and weak, and her doctor said to eat 150 grams. I think it was 150 grams of meat a day. It's a lot. Uh,
150 grams of
and she
protein or meat?
meat and which is mostly protein. So she did that, and she lived to be 117 years old. So I think I think it really depends on where you are in terms of your choices, but meat is a really important source of bioavailable nutrients that are hard to get. And also, basically, we can't eat the things that animals eat. So goats, sheep, cows can eat all this grass, and they are able to upcycle that into super nutrient dense protein. I just was in Africa and Rwanda, and I got to see the gorillas, which was sort of always a dream of mine
Mm.
since I saw Diane Fossey speak at Cornell when I was in biology class like 40 plus years ago. Finally made it there, and and it was amazing. Those gorillas were monstrous, and people go, "Oh yeah, gorillas are vegans." I'm like, "Yeah, well they are. They eat insects too, but mostly they eat plants. But they eat 55 pounds of food a day, and they eat half the day just to get enough food. And they have these enormous intestines. So these giant big gorilla bellies, that's not fat. Those are intestines that they need to be extremely long to process all that plant food. So you can get enough protein from plants if you eat enough plants. But most of us, there's no way we're gonna be able to do that as we get older.
Yes. And what about for children? That's like, I think, everybody can make a vegan diet work if you really work at it, I think, for some people. But kids, I'm worried about because there's those critical windows of development. So, what do you think about for parents who might be considering raising their children as vegans?
I mean, there are some countries where it's illegal and parents get put in jail. So
Yeah.
I think that speaks to some of it. I think again, it depends on how you're doing it and what you're doing. And I know families that have raised healthy vegan kids, so it's not impossible. But I do think you should be really aware of the need for high quality nutrition as you're growing and as kids are growing, and they need a lot more nutrients. Now they are better able to use less protein to synthesize more muscle and to grow. So they're actually better than someone who's older and can get by with less protein. But it's important to understand that they need high quality nutrition and high quality nutrients. And the average kid who's a vegan is going to be having pasta and pizza and pizza or vegan pizza or whatever. And that's not a healthy diet.
So, making sure that they're tested for things like B12 deficiency and on would be the way to go if you were going to do it and you
Yeah.
wanted to do it responsibly. Yeah. Is there any
Yeah.
good
I mean,
questions?
I can tell you, yeah, I can tell you it takes a lot of work. And and this patient once who's like, I don't want to take any vitamins. I'm like, I'm going to figure out what nutrients are in food and what I need, and I'm just going to get that. I'm like, okay. She goes, well, I have like 3 Brazil nuts a day to get selenium, and I have like 17 pumpkin seeds, and I go to get enough zinc, and I have like, okay, that's great, go for it. But that's not what most people are going to do, and I think even with that, omega-3 fats are really a challenge because they were more abundant in wild plant foods, but we don't eat that many. Purslane has some more in it, and certain plants like algae has bioavailable omega-3 fats that are not ALA. ALA is the one that's in plants, and that's not very well available and converted into the EPA DHA, which we need. So I mean, omega-3s are a big issue. Vitamin D is important, that from the sun, but also from food, and and iron, and zinc, and iodine, unless you eat a lot of seaweed. So
Yeah.
there are ways to do it. I just think you have to kind of be smart, and it's a lot easier to get nutrient dense food that includes animals. Not I would say the majority of your diet should be animal food. No, I in fact recommend 70, 80, 90% of your plate be vegetables, with a small sort of portion of animal protein on the side. We don't need as much as we think. It's not like we need a 16-ounce T-bone steak. If you have 4 ounces, that's a good amount. That's 30 grams of protein at a meal. That's not very much. I mean, it's just a small little piece of protein.
Yeah, so you're not on the carnivore train. Do you think that carnivore diets might have benefits for certain
Mm,
populations? It's tricky, I know.
I mean, listen, I mean, people can eat sawdust and live a long time. So I think people come up with all kinds of crazy ideas. And I think for people who have, certain conditions like autoimmune diseases and other problems, it's not only what they're eating, it's what they're getting rid of. If you get rid of gluten and dairy and sugar and all these things, and all you're eating is meat, you're eliminating a lot of things that are causing disease. Ultimately, I think you're going to get in trouble because I think you have to eat a lot of organ meats to get enough nutrients of certain nutrients that you're not going to get. You also are not getting fiber. You're also not getting a lot of phytochemicals unless you're eating, huge amounts of like regeneratively raised meats, which don't still have as much as plants. So I think it's really tricky.
Yeah. Okay. One last question about the food system before we move on to how it's produced. And that is things like the food compass and our dietary recommendations. You alluded to the fact that, 6 to 11 servings of grains per day or, carbohydrates might not be necessary. But what do you think is the big impediment to more evolutionary appropriate dietary recommendations?
You know, I mean, listen, evolution from an evolutionary perspective, can we all go back to being hundreds and gatherers and eating only wild food that we hunt and gather? No. And what are we calling a paleo diet now may not be really a true paleo diet, right? So I think we have to be kind of smart about that. I think from an evolutionary perspective, we want to optimize these ancient pathways, and there's ways to do it through, having a wide variety of different foods in your diet. So I think lower refined foods, lower starch and sugar, lower processed foods or none. Having high quality plant foods, high quality animal foods, all that is going to just help activate the proper switches in your biology to prevent disease and be healthy and live a long time. So I think I hate to be in extreme camps, and it depends on what's going on with that person. Some people want to be on a keto diet and they'll lose 30 pounds and drop their cholesterol 200 points and their triglycerides 300 points. And another person who wanted to be keto, I'm like, okay, you can try it. He was a slim guy and he ended up, his lipids went crazy. So the same diet can do very different things for different people. We're all different. So I hate to be prescriptive and say one size fits all. I just don't think that's realistic in nutrition, that we need to understand personalization and what works for different people.
I like it. So what about the food system, particularly how we're raising animals? You mentioned that you think they're disastrous, CAFOs, confined animal feeding operations, but can you tell us why? What are the specific problems with the way we're raising animals today?
Well, a couple things. One is, you are what you eat, and you are whatever you ate.
Yeah.
So, uh, and some of the most interesting, from the health perspective, right? There's health, there's moral, and there's environmental. And I think from the health perspective, there's some really being interesting work being done by uh, Stephen Van Vliet and others, from Duke and now Utah State and Fred Provenza, looking at the metabolomics of, for example, grass-fed, finished, pasture-raised animals versus feedlot animals. And he just is about to publish a study showing an analysis of 1,500 different metabolites and compounds that are different or were evaluated in between pasture raised and feedlot bison in this case, which is way better than feedlot cows for many reasons. So it was striking the different levels of omega-3s, different levels of nutrients, different levels of phytochemicals, the things you wouldn't think are in animals that come from regeneratively raised animals. So I think if I have the choice to eat a wild elk or deer meat or bison, I would do that over a regeneratively raised cow over a obviously feedlot cow. Um, if the feedlot cows are fed grain. That's not their normal diet. They have much higher levels of omega-6 fats. They have much more inflammatory molecules there. I saw one study where they fed people kangaroo meat versus a feedlot meat, and even ounce for ounce is exactly the same protein, everything else. One raised inflammation, which is the feedlot meat, and the kangaroo meat reduced inflammation. So even if you're looking at it looks like a plate, the same amount of meat, it can have profoundly different effects on your biology. From the environmental perspective and climate perspective, I think, industrial agriculture is a disaster. We're raping the soil, we're tilling, we're destroying the soil organic matter. We've lost 1/3 of all the carbon of all the carbon in the soil. And sorry, edit this. We basically eroded the soil so dramatically that 1/3 of all the carbon in the atmosphere comes from the loss of the organic matter in the soil because of tillage and because of nitrogen fertilizer, because of pesticides, chemicals, glyphosate, which destroys the soil microbiome, the soil life, the soil organic matter that's in there gets lost. And so we need to put it back in there. So, I mean, the biggest carbon sink on the planet is all the grasslands. It's not necessarily the rainforest. So we can replenish a lot of the carbon from the atmosphere into the soil, store it, and actually build healthier soils, grow better food, and so forth. And animals are a key part of doing that. You need to have animals. I mean, that's how we got 8 to 50 feet of topsoil in America, was the 160 plus million ruminants that roamed here before the white guys got here. And that led to incredibly fertile soil, which now is, mostly being degraded or as being completely destroyed. So that's really important to understand how to use regenerative practices to restore agricultural ecosystems that creates better environment for the animals. It creates, better climate and environmental impact, and also produces better, higher quality food for us.
Yeah. As a doctor, are you concerned about antibiotic resistance and the way that antibiotics are used in
Oh,
animals
yeah,
today? Yeah.
yeah. I mean that's a whole nother issue. There's about, I think, 30 something pounds of sort of million pounds of antibiotics used annually in America, and 29 million are used for animals, not for treating disease, but for preventing infection, or for treating cows for bowel issues because they can't actually digest corn, and so they basically blow up. They get bloat, so you have to give them antibiotics to keep the bacteria down in their gut, and so that's a disaster. That's creating antibiotic resistance globally that kills 700,000 people a year. The cost to society is $2 trillion a year. So yeah, it's bad news.
Yeah.
And it should be really, the FDA has tried to control it, but the food industry kind of wiggles around it. But the antibiotics should be used in animal husbandry, but only in the case of need and infection. It's like, imagine giving antibiotic to every school kid every year to prevent them getting strep, because if you just gave all the kids antibiotics all the time in school, they never get strep. Well, that's a dumb way to treat people. Is the same thing with animals.
Yeah, absolutely. And hormones and ractopamine, are there other additives that you think might be negatively impacting human health?
Well, sure. I mean, we were giving animals bovine growth hormone and estrogen. I mean, they'll implant estrogen, and it's actually used DES, which is banned in humans because it causes birth defects. But they implant that in the ears of steers as a way to fatten them up, because estrogen makes you soft and round and plump, which is what we want for our animals, to be more fatty and a little bit leaner, more plump. So that's not necessarily good for us. I think how much is in there and how much is the meat, how much are we getting, how does it influence us? Hard to say, but I think it's having an impact. I think in dairy for sure it is, because they milk cows when they're pregnant. I think the pesticides and herbicides they use, are particularly the pesticides are very estrogenic and hormonally active. So the whole thing is a disaster.
Yeah. And you mentioned the soil, right? And climate. So if we were to not move into a more regenerative type of system, what would happen to the soil and climate change? And what would that mean for human health?
Well, I mean, according to the UN, there may be only 60 harvests left. According to a report that Obama did at the end of his administration, there may be only 80 years of soil left in America.
Mm.
Um, and that's a very scary proposition, right? No soil, no food, no humans. I mean, we can only flog the soil so much with pesticides and fertilizers and herbicides and chemicals to grow food. So I think it's an existential threat. And so we need to learn how to grow our food and change our agricultural policies to actually support soil replenishment. And the UN also estimates that if 2 out of the 5 million acres of degraded land around the world that are degraded through farming practices or overgrazing, if we change those all to regenerative agriculture, which would cost, by the way, $300 billion, which seems like a lot, but it's like, I think, I don't know, probably a tenth of what we spent, I don't know, on COVID, uh, just in relief packages. And I mean, I'm just in America. I mean, and what we spent on war. I mean, 300 billion is not a lot of money that we could reverse the carbon issue enough to stall climate change for 20 years. So we would basically get a pause on climate change for 20 years if we just took 2 of the 5 million acres and converted them to regenerative agriculture. So that's pretty impressive data.
Yeah, really impressive. And so before I get to my two final questions, do you think there's anything else you'd like to add to the environmental piece about something you're concerned about there?
Well, I think, it's all about balance and ecological balance in our health and in our ecosystem we live on called the planet, in our agricultural ecosystems and biodiversity. And we have to understand that we need to have a more regenerative system for health and for agriculture. And if we get that concept of regeneration, that it's not just about, carbon neutral or, net zero or any of this nonsense. It's really about, reversing the problem. And it's just like, it's not like managing chronic disease. I want to reverse diabetes. I don't want to just manage it. So the same thing with what's going on with the climate and environment. And I think we have the capacity to do that if there's the political will and the understanding. The science is there. Of course, we always need more, but I think it's a pretty exciting moment. And I think governments around the world are understanding this. The IRA bill that got passed last summer had $20 billion in it for improvement of agricultural practices and regenerative ag. And I was in my nonprofit Food Fix campaign was a big part of advocating for that and lobbying for that. So I think, we're getting there.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for all that advocacy. So if you could wave a magic wand and there could be, 3 changes to our food system that you could make, what would you do?
Well, that'd be easy.
What
First, I would every food program, every food policy, every dietary guideline would have to only be measured on one metric, which is food quality. And that requires a definition, but basically we all have a gut feeling of what that means. Is broccoli high in food quality? Yes. Is um, soda? No. Right. So and second, we would over a short period of time fund and advocate for a conversion of our agricultural system to a regenerative system. And that could happen fairly quickly if there was enough investment and political will. I think, those two things are huge, considering food as medicine and regenerative ag. Those are the big things I would do. And then I would also change healthcare by educating physicians in the power of nutrition to cure disease and to change reimbursement to pay for the right things rather than spending, hundreds of thousands of dollars on pharmacology and expensive treatments to actually pay for what works, like food as medicine and medically tailored meals and many, many things. So those are the things that I would do.
Okay, final question, Dr. Hyman. It is, what are the most impactful dietary steps we can take as consumers to either improve our own health or improve the health of our food system?
Well, basically, I used to do all these talks at churches and had to run a faith-based wellness program. And I used to get up on stage and say, it's really easy to figure out what to eat. Ask yourself, did God make this or did man make this? Did God make a Twinkie? No. Did God make an avocado? Yes. And if man made it, don't eat it. If God made it, eat it.
There you go. I love it. That's
I was in Rwanda and there was a kid who was like chewing on this thing. It was a stalk, and I'm like, what's that? And like he's like, and the woman was this help translate. It was a corn stalk. So when you peel back, it was like after the corn had been harvested, there's the stalks in the field. The kid went and grabbed it, and if you peel the corn stalk and you chew on it, it's like sweet. It's got sugar in there. So he like chewed on the corn stalk. I'm like, great. that's way better than high fructose corn syrup, and way better to get your like sugar than that, you know. And I thought, okay. And this other girl was eating an avocado. It was like a little 2-year-old girl, like literally peeled an avocado, like she peeled the, you know, like peel the orange, and was just like eating the avocado. Like, you don't see that in America. So yeah.
No, you don't. And in final, like closing, there's one other thing that I would love for your thoughts on that you've said. So in this environment in America,
You keep saying it's the last question.
I'm so sorry. This I promise. I promise. I promise. What's wrong with personal responsibility in America, right? Saying it's, yeah, and this is your last final question, promise.
Yeah. Well, this is a question that could take an hour to unpack, but
Yeah.
you know, part of the problem with our food guidelines and recommendations and the general narrative and set of beliefs among policymakers, doctors, nutritionists, and the general public is that it's basically your fault if you're overweight. That weight loss is a matter of calories in, calories out. So if you eat less and exercise more, that you lose weight. If you don't, it means you're a lazy glutton. And that just flies in the face of science. The science is really clear that the foods that we've made available to people are highly addictive. They are highly metabolically active. They activate all these processes in the body, like insulin resistance, that make us gain weight and be hungry and want to exercise less. And so we kind of have to stop blaming the individual and understand that it's the food environment and the food system. That doesn't mean to say that we don't all have choice. We do have choice, but at the end of the day, it's, you know, if someone's like got an IV in your arm and is as putting heroin in there every day, it's hard to, you know, quit the heroin. And it's pretty much like that. Everywhere you go, everywhere you look, all the messages, all the things that are easily accessible and available are all generally bad for us.
You're done. Good job. You nailed it. Thank you, Dr. Hyman. That really was your last question, and I'm so appreciative of your time. You did a great job. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
I have a
I
lot of
hope that was good for you.
It was great. No, it was great. Yeah, you hit on everything I wanted. And you'll probably end up in a few different videos, and I will send them to you for your approval and the context and all that stuff. So thank you. This was
Great. Well, grateful for it. And thanks for doing this.
yeah. So we'll be in touch and go
Okay.
enjoy, take a
Okay.
bathroom break. Okay. Have a good day.
And you guys can go promote my book as part of it?
Heck yeah. Here's the thing. If you have time, I'd love to have you back on the podcast for a proper, you know, reversing or, you know, healthy aging show if you want to. I would love that. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Great.
Yeah. So we'll definitely promote everything. Okay. Bye, Dr. Hyman.
Okay. Bye.